Scott. Good afternoon. It's good to be here, and I'm excited to be able to introduce our consulting team. This is our second comprehensive study since I've been with the city. There was one done in 2005, 2006 by Skipper Consulting. From that report, we had priority projects. We actually finished up the last project from the report from 10 years ago in 2016. In 2017, we kicked off this new study. We scoped the project with Skipper. Council approved their contract in late 2018. And we scoped the project in the summer of 17. City Council approved the contract in late 17. And the project was started, and in April of 18, we had our very first public hearing. So I want to introduce Richard Cottle. He's with Skipper Consulting. He has been the lead on the project and the project manager. Joe Gilpin is with Alta. He participated in the bicycle and pedestrian recommendations. And Parker Lewis is one of our local engineers who's with Hydro Engineering, and he helped with the cost estimating. So Richard is going to cover some data on the traffic study, and then I'm going to cover the exhibits and the recommended projects. But anytime you have questions, you can stop us. Again, Parker's here, and Joe and Richard. Okay.
Yes. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Richard Cottle. I'm the project manager with Skipper Consulting on the traffic study that the City of Auburn contracted with us in. Back in December 2017 is when the contract was initially signed, and we've been working for the last year and a half, collecting traffic counts, doing analysis, and preparing recommendations. And those recommendations you'll see in detail as part of this particular presentation that we hear today. I want to introduce the team a little bit more. Skipper Consulting, we're out of Birmingham. We're traffic engineers. That's all we do is traffic. Been doing this for about 35 years now. Allison was mistaken one thing. We actually did a traffic study for the City of Auburn, same thing back in 1987.
I just said
So,
my tenure.
Yes. way before. But so this is actually the third time. And what is very unique about the City of Auburn, and we don't see in a lot of peer cities, is first of all the magnitude of a study like this. Very few of your peer cities would actually ever undertake a study of this magnitude to look at the traffic within the corporate limits. So you're above your peer cities, especially here in Alabama. It's unheard of for another city to do this kind of effort. The second thing that I want to mention is in the past, these studies have always concentrated on traffic. They've always been turn lane improvements, signal improvements, access management, things like this. This is the first time we have recognized as part of the traffic study that pedestrian and bicycle provisions are just as important to the transportation system as moving cars. And so we specifically went out and searched for the nationwide expert in pedestrian and bicycle planning, and that's Alta Planning and Design. And Joe Gilpin, he's from Tuscaloosa, is part of the team. And then another important thing that we have here is Auburn is also very unique in the fact that everything that is recommended in these traffic studies eventually gets built. There are really no pie in the sky, sit on a shelf type reports that we've ever submitted before. Once these things make it into a report, the City of Auburn diligently pursues the construction of them. So Parker Lewis with Hydro Engineering, very important part of our team to make sure that we get some good, accurate preliminary cost estimate and opinion of constructability of the projects. So that's a little bit more about our team. The scope of work, I'm not going to read everything in detail here, but there are some things that I do want to point out, is we're doing evaluations of corridors and isolated intersections in Auburn. And then another major thing that we're doing is working with your new traffic signal system equipment that you've installed as part of a federal aid project to actually put new timings and traffic signals to help with the flow of traffic around the city. I'll cover that in a little bit more detail in just a minute. What intersections and corridors are we looking at? College Street, Donahue Drive, Gay Street, Dean Road, Moores Mill Road, Glen Avenue, Sanford Avenue, Bent Creek Road, Opelika Road, East University Drive, and Shook Durden Parkway are all the major corridors that we looked at. If you want to look at it on a map, every corridor that we looked at is highlighted in green on this map, and then every intersection that we studied in detail is shown by a red dot. That is 100 intersections that were included in our scope of work. That is way beyond anything that's been done in the past for Auburn. I think the last time we did this study, we looked at 3 or 4 corridors and about 30 intersections. So this is a much larger effort and product than has been looked at in the past. We began the work by looking at crash statistics for motor vehicles in the city. A very important aspect of our recommendations is safety. We do want to make traffic flow, we want to make traffic flow well, but we're also significantly concerned about safety. And so the first task that we undertook was a crash study. Here we have a comparison from the work that we did back in 2005, which is this half of the table, versus the work that was done in 2008 on this half of the table. And what you can see here is Auburn compared with many of the cities around the state of Alabama. The population has gone up since we did this back in 2005, of course. But if you look through here, the number of crashes has gone down. The number of crashes with fatalities has gone down. And if we look at a graph of what's going on, what we can see is over time from the year 2000 up to the year 2016, the number of injuries have remained fairly constant. The number of crashes that have occurred within the city has trended up and then trended back down, and it's starting to trend back upward again. You really can't tell a whole lot from the last 2 data points. You gotta get a few more years on that to see what the trend really is, but we are concerned that crashes do seem to be trending up some over the last couple of years. What caused the crashes? I'm not going to read the table, but I do want to highlight 2 things. 22%, almost a quarter of the crashes that occur in the city are from people following too close. That's the most common primary cause of crashes that occur within the city. The other one is this one right here. 16% of the crashes are caused, the primary cause was distracted driving. When we did this back in 2005, it didn't even appear on the chart. And I think it's a sign of the times that we're seeing that there's more and more distraction in the motor vehicle, and it's actually a very serious contributor to crashes within the city of Auburn. We evaluated all 100 intersections that were chosen for study, and of those 100 intersections, 13 of those intersections were what we considered high priority crash locations. And what high priority crash locations mean, and I'll show you a table on the next screen, is that there were more crashes that occurred at the intersection than were predicted. We have methodologies where we can predict the number of crashes that should be occurring at an intersection and how many actually occurred. Also, how much those crashes cost the public in terms of lost time of work, medical bills and things like that. And the table is it looks like this. These are those 13 intersections. The rank according to predicted number of crashes here, the level of safety service priority, and equivalent type property damage only. And then finally, that last column is what I was mentioning. How much those crashes actually cost the city and the public in terms of money, lost business time, medical bills. And so you can see that some of our highest priority intersections, South College at Longleaf, South College at East University Drive in Shook Jordan, the crash costs on those across the 3 years that we analyzed, or the middle one there is up at $9 million. So this went into our priorities. Those intersections here, where we could identify a mitigative measure to construct to try to lessen the number of crashes and the severity of crashes, ranked very high on our list of the priorities that you're going to see a bit later on in this presentation.
Richard, how do you come to know those numbers for the crash costs?
The FHWA produces a table that's used across the entire nation on how much a property damage only crash costs. With property damage only is a vendor, things that send cars to the shop. And then there is a scale called CABCO, K-A-B-C-O. K is for fatalities, then you have A for life-threatening injuries, visible injuries, and then injuries that required a doctor's visit, injuries that did not require a doctor's visit. And there's a dollar value for every person that that's involved in the crash assigned that way.
Almost like an actuary, like,
I guess like kind of like an actuary.
okay.
So,
Okay.
there's standardization across the entire nation and
I see.
how those are done.
Richard, how do our numbers look compared to peer cities? Are those numbers high, low, what you expect?
Let's see, if you go back to this particular slide here, since we use the same database in every, since we use the same database of cost for every city, you can see here that, well, if we just take, for example, for, say, the city of Birmingham here has 74 crashes per 1,000 people. The city of Auburn has 31 crashes per 1,000 people. So when you compare, and you can just look down this entire column right here, and you're going to see that Auburn is significantly lower in crashes per 1,000 people than everybody except for this one line here, which is Madison, Alabama. So in terms of the question of how do you line up with the rest of the state, you're in the top, who knows, top 5% of safe cities would be probably the best way to put it.
Thank you.
All right, we'll get back together.
Yes.
So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Joe Gilpin with Alta, and he's going to take you through a series of slides on the incorporation of pedestrian and bicycle facilities into the traffic study.
Richard, good afternoon, everyone. As Richard said earlier, this is the first study that's been done that does include bicycle and pedestrian safety, and that's something to really, I think, commend about the city of Auburn here. So we did want to mention that yet again. And this study focuses on the same corridors that Richard just showed everybody, which is a limited number of corridors in the system. Now, we're thinking about bicycle and pedestrian facilities also in a larger, more coordinated network fashion. This is the Connect Auburn plan that my firm's also working on right now, and so these two efforts are coordinated. So that's a really great thing in thinking about connectivity, how these corridors are going to meet other corridors and expand the network in a very logical way going forward, and that'll go into our prioritization as well. In terms of walkway recommendations, we focused really on both the previously planned walkways that come out of previous planning efforts. We reevaluated those, looked at how they were going to function and serve the community. And we focused on three things primarily: safety, looking at high-risk roadways. So an example would be adding a multi-use path on South College. Connectivity, so filling gaps. An example is sidewalks on Orange Onahue. And access, so roadways with high densities of destinations that pedestrians really want to get to. So those are going to be higher priorities than roadways that are out where there aren't many pedestrian destinations. So a good example there would be Opelika. Additionally, with bicycle facilities, we have a number of different facilities planned here. And the key focus that we had was trying to add meaningful facilities in that were going to provide some level of safety and connectivity. However, not looking at solutions that would provide any kind of a detriment to roadway vehicle capacity. So that was a big concern that we were trying to keep at our forefront throughout the planning process. So I'm going to get into some additional safety information here. And so similarly to vehicle crashes, Auburn rates very, very well in terms of pedestrian and bicycle crashes. And in fact, we were quite surprised moving through the crash analysis as we moved through the project. So between 2012 and 2016, there were 67 crashes involving pedestrians for an average of 13 a year, and 41 crashes for bicyclists involving about 8 a year. So there were 8,700 vehicle crashes during that time. You can see that it's a small number. We also know that bicycling and walking relatively make up a small number of overall transportation-based trips. So for comparing that to the number of commute mode share trips, 0.8% of crashes are pedestrian crashes out of the total number, and 5.4% of all commute to work trips are by walking. So you can see that the number of crashes are very well underrepresented in terms of the percentage of commute trips. Similarly for bicycling, bicyclists make up 5.5% of all crashes and 1.2% of transportation-based commute trips. And so again, we're underrepresented. Now, having said that, crashes involving bicycles and pedestrians tend to be more severe, right? Bicycles and pedestrians do not have the rest of a vehicle around those users, so they're vulnerable. They tend to overrepresent in terms of serious injury and fatal crashes in that way. The good news is that we don't have that many fatal crashes. I think only 4 pedestrian crashes in that same time period. Pedestrian and bicycle crashes also tend to be very well focused on the arterial roadway system. So in terms of looking at the overall number of crashes and where they occur and the number of lane miles of facilities and where those occur, you can see that only 28% of Auburn's roadway network miles are arterial, but however, we're seeing 35% and 45% of those pedestrian and bicycle crashes occurring on those arterials. And so that was something that we were thinking about during the recommendations. We also ran a model that we're calling the bicycle and pedestrian safety risk, and this takes a look at a lot of very commonly available information about roadway risk. So number of travel lanes, posted speed on that roadway, the volume of traffic that's occurring on those roadway networks, and all of that sort of adds up to provide a certain level of risk to the bicyclist or pedestrian. And we did that for both bicycle and pedestrians, and then that was later then used to help with our prioritization and other types of activities. So in terms of, again, comparing Auburn to other communities within the state of Alabama, Auburn ranks very well. This is a chart that pulls information from the CARE database, and Auburn's bicycle crash rate is similar to Tuscaloosa and Decatur, but much lower than all of the other communities in Alabama. Similarly, for pedestrians, again, very, very low. This isn't to say that we can't do better, but to say that things were already much better than other communities throughout Alabama. So we went through a number of implementation strategies, looking at how the facilities might look, and then also thought about project prioritization. So every recommendation in the study comes with a facility type and a specific implementation strategy. So we know not just what's aligned on the map, but actually how those facilities are going to fit dimensionally within those corridors. We looked at prioritization based on using a quantitative model. We looked at latent demand for walking and bicycling, so we know that there's areas of high use with very low, either high risk or low accommodation in terms of facilities. We looked at the current user experience. We looked at systematic risk factors, crash history. We used public input as throughout this project, and also thought about equity, so different parts of the community that may be more underserved in terms of facilities. So those are all used to come up with prioritization, and those are integrated completely seamlessly with the recommendations that are coming from Skipper as well. Thinking about how these are actually going to look on the ground, we provided a number of different design guidelines. And so, I know that the topic of green pavement's been something that's been talked about in the city, so we're providing guidance on how to use it. So in this example, a dashed area of green indicates kind of a conflict area, and a solid area of green indicates a bicycle exclusive area. And so that would be the methodology.
Is that a new methodology? Recently new?
It's been around for about 15 years, I would say, in various states. Not all communities do it the same way. And what really helps is, as you're starting to do it, to figure out what the local standard is and stick to it moving forward, because there have been communities that have mixed and matched and experimented, and it begins to be very confusing for drivers and bicyclists at that point.
Has that proven to not be a safety concern?
Adding the color?
Yeah, adding the color, but staying on the same roadway, same piece of asphalt, I guess, as vehicles, but you're adding the color. Is that proven to be safe?
It is.
Okay.
It increases the amount of driver yielding to bicyclists in that conflict lead area by a lot. I think by almost 90% increases the yielding. And it also there's been studies that show mentally it makes bicyclists feel a lot safer having that on there because they're more visible.
Thank you.
And finally, thinking about transitions, a lot of these network facilities come together at intersections, and you might have on one leg of the intersection a bike lane, on another a multi-use path, a sidewalk on another leg. How do you connect all of these things together? So we came up with a concept for Dean and Okalaka. And that has a number of different escape ramps to access multi-use paths, as a combination of bike lanes, shared lane markings, and other types of facilities that are going to link all of these different facilities together. So this was a nice concept to show how all that would work. Any other questions? No? All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Joe. I am going to drill down into one of the tasks for just a minute with you, talking about proposed traffic signal systems here in the city. The city of Auburn has had little to no coordination of traffic signals for quite a few years. Back in the early 2000s, there was a system that was installed on Opelika Road down near the mall. There was a system that was installed on College Street going through the heart of Auburn University. Those systems were not maintained, and so at the beginning of this particular traffic study, I don't believe there were any coordinated traffic signals in the city. And what we mean by coordinated traffic signals are signals that are specifically programmed to provide progression, to provide a green band as you drive up and down the road. So that's the city of Auburn and the Auburn area MPO has recently invested a fairly significant amount of money in technology in traffic signals. It involves putting communications out to traffic signals. It involves putting a central computer for the city of Auburn to be able to monitor the traffic signals. This study is an element of that overall effort in providing timings in traffic signal systems in order to coordinate them, in order for people to be able to get on Opelika Road or on Gay Street and not have to stop at every signal. And so the effort that I'm going to show you here is part of our work was to prepare traffic signal system timings for each of those roadways that you see up here on the list. And it's a lot easier to look at a map. Everywhere we have a blue highlight there is a target of a traffic signal system to be implemented in the city. Now, I have been asked to say that very few people here in the city of Auburn have any experience on a day-to-day driving with a traffic signal system. The way the traffic signal system works is it guarantees a certain amount of green time out on the main street. In order to do that, the side streets have additional delay because the side streets aren't allowed to come out anytime a car pulls up. The side streets are given specific windows of time in that green band where there's no cars coming that cars can pull out. That means they may sit a little longer on the side street. If you pick up the phone, people may say they're sitting a lot longer on the side street, but that is true. That is true that the car will sit a little longer on the side street when you have a coordinated traffic signal system. But as I'll show you in a minute, what time is lost by the car sitting on the side street, by the driver sitting on the side street, is more than made up when they get out on the main street. And I'll show you an example of some of the results that we're getting on coordinated corridors in just a second. The other thing that we have to realize is that when we have coordinated signal systems, the coordination is benefiting the major road, where we may be benefiting hundreds of drivers by reducing their travel time. And I hate to use the word, but at the expense, because it's really not expense, it's just people don't like sitting on the side street for a little longer waiting for their signal to turn green. But it helps with things like air quality, it helps with fuel consumption. And it's probably best for me just to show you where we are and what kind of results that we're seeing so far. So here's a list of all the corridors, how many signals. When you get to the bottom line of that long list, there are roughly 70 some odd traffic signals within the city of Auburn. Our systems are going to coordinate about half of those signals that are in the city of Auburn. You have a lot of isolated signals that aren't really near other signals that will remain in what we call free operation, no coordination. 36 of the signals out there in your city, though, are slated to be coordinated as part of the city. The signal systems that are highlighted in red are the ones that have already been completed to date as part of this study. So Moores Mill Road, Opelika Road, Dean Road, Gay Street, and North Donahue Drive have already been completed. We're working this summer on College Street and out there on EUD around the area of the mall. So what kind of results are we getting? Well, here's an example of some of the results from Dean Road. The entire corridor goes from East University Drive to East University Drive, all the way from the north end of the city to the south end of the city. And what I have here is you have two directions, northbound and southbound on Dean Road, and I pulled results for the peak hour in the morning, the peak hour around lunch, the peak hour in the afternoon. Before we implemented the signal system in the mornings northbound, The average speed on the corridor is 15 miles per hour. After we finish the implementation, the average speed on the corridor has gone up to 22.5 miles per hour. Now, I'm not going to read this whole table to you, but you can see looking down every one of those, there's at least a one, in some cases, almost a 7 mile per hour improvement in speeds on these corridors. When you improve speed, you decrease travel time. But the other thing that I want to show you is stops. This is a trajectory graph on Dean Road in the morning going northbound. This is leaving from the south end of East University Drive and going all the way to the north end of East University Drive. And you can see anytime this thing peaks out to the bottom, that's a stop. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 stops on that corridor in the morning. After we finished implementing the signal system, not only did the speed go up about 7.5 miles per hour, but as we go through here, we have one stop, that'd be at Glen, and then a stop at the very end at Northeast University Drive. So that's the kind of results that we're seeing from the implementation of these signal times. And that's the end of the presentation. Well, no, I have more slides. I want to go on to Allison's going to get up in a minute and talk to you about specific projects, but I do have a few slides to introduce that. The big task of the whole study is to produce recommended improvement projects for the city of Auburn to consider for capital improvement projects for the next 10 to 15 years from the life of the traffic study. So in our work, we have 65 recommended improvement projects. And what we have done is we divided them into 4 categories. Projects that you should do immediately, in the short term, midterm, and long term. Immediate projects were selected based on safety concerns. Those intersections where we're having overrepresented number of crashes or very high crash costs are going to be in the immediate implementation. The short-term projects are generally smaller projects that we find are needed today. And when we get down into the midterm and the long-term projects, what you will see is bigger projects that would take longer to implement and that are really needed, not based on today's traffic so much, but traffic projections that we did for 10 years in the future. I wanted to make sure we know that everything here at this point is preliminary. Where we have these things assigned into priority categories is preliminary. We're still working through this to make sure that capital needs budgets and projects all fit together. I'm not going to go through each individual project. Allison's going to take us through the corridors in a minute. But you can see this is our immediate program of projects, and they're spread around all over the city, mainly addressing safety concerns and high priority pedestrian concerns. More projects in the short-term plan, midterm projects, and then finally the long-range projects. Complete plan, when it comes together, looks like that. Every project is given a specific designator so that when you as a city go to implement a project, you can say, we're implementing project EUD1 for your accounting system and for everybody's peace of mind. I'll want to give recognition to Parker back there. Parker has done all the cost estimating for all 65 of these projects. Here's the way it breaks down. If you look at the projects, $620,000 of those are in the immediate category, $4.6 million in the short term, $3.4 million in the midterm, and then $17.2 million of that is in the long term. First of all, and before we look at the individual projects, I do want to say that about half of that number is about 13 to 14 million is a significant project on North Donahue Drive. Widening North Donahue Drive, installing bike lanes, installing sidewalks, multi-use paths on North Donahue Drive. Those particular project is about 14 million of this entire